Hello everybody. My name is Ronald Snyder, and together with Nancy Lin and James English, I'm going to talk about how we added 10,000 open access books from the OAPEN Library to the Palace project, and that's why we wanted to call it Adding a Wing to the Palace. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about OAPEN and the OAPEN Library. Then Nancy will talk about the New York University libraries and the Palace project. And then lastly, James will talk about Lyrasis and the open publications distribution systems that makes all of this possible. So let's talk about the OAPEN Library and the OAPEN Foundation. I work for the OAPEN Foundation, and the mission of OAPEN is to increase discoverability of open access books and to promote and to build trust in open access books publishing. We are a not-for-profit organization. We are a Dutch stichting. And one of the important things about that is that we cannot be bought or we cannot be sold. We currently have three basic big platforms that we are running. Our oldest one is the OAPEN Library, where we host and distribute and preserve over 30,000 open access full text books and chapters. I'll talk a little bit more about OAPEN in a few moments. But we also manage the directory of open access books, which is a global indexing service. It contains now over 75,000 descriptions of peer-reviewed open access books, and all that is free for everybody to use, and it contains content for over 600 publishers. And lastly, we also have the Open Access Books Toolkit, which is a website that gives you more information about open access books, for instance, when you're a publisher, or specifically when you're an author or you are thinking about writing a book in open access. So a little bit more about the OAPEN Library. This is our oldest platform that we launched in 2010. As you can see from the bar chart below, the right side, our collection kept on growing until we recently hit the 30,000 mark. All the books are available in full text. They're all peer-reviewed books and chapters, I should add. And what we do here is hosting and distribution and preservation. And our platform is based on the DSpace environment, so it's actually also a repository. But apart from the, let's say, normal repository affordabilities, we also made sure that we can easily integrate with library catalogs. So we are providing metadata feeds in MARC, XML, and KBARD, among other things. And very recently, we also worked with Penn State University libraries that provide us with a MARC 21 feed of our collection. The dissemination part I put in this lovely little diagram here. As you can see, we work with many organizations to make sure that our books and our metadata reach libraries, and also, of course, in the end, read our readers and teachers and researchers who want to make use of our open access books. So dissemination is one of the main things that we do, and so integrating the OAPEN Library collection into the Palace project app was to us a logical extension of what we do. And this is a bit of a complicated thing for us, so we started with a proof of concept where we selected 10,000 books in English and Spanish on a big range of different subjects. And we started building a ODPS feed, and Nancy and James will actually talk a little bit about that more. And we succeeded in adding those 10,000 books to the Palace app. And as you remember, we have more than 30,000 titles in the OAPEN Library. So the next thing is to think about the future plans. How are we going to make those titles available as well? Or should we slice them up in several collections? And what should we do about making chapters available and all that all these kinds of questions. And we are actually building a tool called Memo, which will help us to create all these collections and provide them with the correct metadata to integrate them into, for instance, the Palace app. So thank you. I'll stop talking right now. If you want to connect with me, here are all my details, and I'll ask Nancy to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Ronald. I'm Nancy Lin, the Senior Data Project Strategist at NYU Libraries. NYU Libraries currently provides access to over 180,000 ebooks via the Palace app. Next slide, please. We have thousands of titles from hundreds of publishers through eBook Central, Michigan, and OAPEN, and we're working to include more sources, especially open access titles. As you can see in this screenshot, Palace has these browse lanes where we have chosen to highlight course books as well as NYU Press books. So next slide, please. What are NYU's goals? We want to improve our services and offer better mobile and tablet access to ebooks beyond the browser-based reading experience. Palace is much easier to use than the industry standard Adobe Digital Editions app. Also, Palace is a unified app and can take ebooks from multiple sources. As you can see in our libguides here, Palace works with NYU's single sign-on login, so no additional Adobe login is needed. However, our NYU goes beyond just offering better, improved mobile experiences. We want to reinforce the definition of access and ownership. We're not rebuying the books for mobile, but we're accessing books that we already have. So the cost is showing up to be pennies per title. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? By using open standards for easy interoperability. We build infrastructure for growth and efficiency. This image shows our Palace infrastructure. On the right, you can see the ebook files still live at the source provider. So the EPUB and the PDF, covers, DRM are still coming from the provider. In the middle here shows how we've partnered with Lyrasis to set up the circulation manager to ingest metadata in ebook files for the ebook reader. Circulation Manager also manages our SSO authentication. On the left, this shows how providers create standard OPDS metadata feeds. These sources are using the same exact OPDS2 metadata format instead of proprietary metadata. So the message here is that these open standards allow for efficiently creating systems like this. Next slide, please. So once OAPEN created the OPDS feed, Palace could pull in all those 10,000 books. OAPEN followed the standard, and we were easily able to pull the titles into NYU's Palace library. Lyrasis could also easily spin up this Palace library that you see here in the slide, and the OAPEN titles would be available without authentication to users. We want to make sure that as many users out there as possible can access these titles free without authentication. So again, we've shown how standards allow us to innovate at a pretty low cost. Next slide, please. Here is an example of the OPDS. It includes typical bibliographic metadata like title and author, but I also want to call attention to the transactional data, which is critical for fulfilling these ebooks. This includes acquisitions links, where we can acquire the PDF or EPUB files. It also includes DRM type like Adobe or Open Access. And this data in the OPDS has to be in standardized formats so that the machines and the Palace app can get and distribute the book. So it's pretty powerful to see that if you follow this standard very cheaply, you can get what I just showed you with the OAPEN library within the Palace app. Next slide, please. So it's important for NYU to have all this integrated in our ebook workflows. So we're managing the cataloging records and links for Palace in Alma local portfolios. We're currently using the same metadata records that we used for their counterpart in our catalog. So those from eBook Central, OAPEN, and in the future, we would like to work with OAPEN and the Alma community test creation of e-collections and portfolios to allow other libraries to easily include these free OA Palace app titles in their catalog. Next slide, please. Our users can find Palace titles in our catalog through Primo V, or they can browse for titles by swiping through the lanes in the mobile app. Next slide, please. So the reality is that we function in a complicated ecosystem. So Ronald showed his ecosystem, and this slide shows the many different systems that we use to manage our services. So we'll need to be able to integrate our inventory, cataloging, updates, deletes, ads, matching. And our biggest challenge right now that we're encountering is the lack of universal IDs across all these systems. So while the open metadata standard helps us innovate and create better services, it would be even more powerful if we can start building more and more foundational aspects like open identification numbers that can link titles within this ecosystem. So we could not have done any of this without Lyrasis, who specializes in helping libraries build infrastructure and services. So I will turn this over to James English, who could tell you a little bit more about Lyrasis. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is James English, and I'll be presenting along with my colleagues about building global infrastructure using OPDS as the mortar for building an interoperability and intersystem access to EPUBs and open access materials. Next slide, please. So Lyrasis, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit. We're mission driven. Like OAPEN, we can't be bought or sold. We are driven by our community. Our community members give us guidance on the direction we go, and we provide those services at scale for them in return. We're in over 50 states in the US, over 20 different countries, and 5 different continents. We have over 3,000 members and users, and we primarily focus our services around content and content management systems for our clients and our members. Next slide, please. So one of the services that we provide is the Palace Project. The Palace Project is a mobile app. It was originally developed out of the New York Public Library system, but we've since then taken over this open source code and extended it, enhanced it, and continued to invest in its development around integrations and different content formats and content integrations and authentication integrations. What's unique about the Palace Project, it is a full functioning mobile app e-reader in both Android and iOS, but it allows libraries to tie multiple collections in to present them to their users as one collection. It also extends beyond just the library's holdings into community-based collections, whether those be open access repositories, the public domain corpus of materials out there, or just freely available titles that people curate. Being built by libraries, it is keeps patron privacy at the forefront. That's why we use campus-based authentication, such as SAML with our university clients. And then this is an app for everyone. We know that accessibility and diversity and equity and inclusion are important values to this community. And so this is an app for everyone. It's fully accessible and supports multiple languages as well. Next slide, please. So what is it? Is it just the mobile app? Well, it's both the mobile app and iOS and Android, but there is a significant middleware component that we call the collection manager. And this is the administrative portal for libraries and administrators of the system to be able to, define the collections that they want to integrate and present as their library collection, and to configure the service so that it can authenticate through their authentication systems. It also gives them powerful tools for creating and curating that collection and presenting it to the users in a way that makes the most sense. So as Nancy demonstrated in her part of the presentation for NYU, they use these tools to present their courseworks, to highlight their own press titles, and then also provide their general access to their collection in the app. The other part of the circulation or this collection manager is it is the integration layer to this decentralized ebook ecosystem that is based upon OPDS. It is the foundation by which we use OPDS to basically interoperate with different content repositories, aggregators, ebook service providers so that that content can be then republished in OPDS from the collection manager as a whole collection or catalog for that library or that corpus of content to the end mobile client. And it has all of the metadata, as Nancy described, to both describe and support discovery of content, but actual transactional support to give authorized access, to download the file into the reading system, and to transact any type of DRM that may be applied. So let's talk more about that glue, this OPDS mortar. Next slide, please. But before I do that, let me just talk of kind of the why a mobile app in academic ebook reading. Well, over 50% of all internet traffic is on mobile devices. So it's out, far outpaces servers or PCs. 92% of the global population is accessing information via a mobile device. And even though that 50% in the US is on mobile, 90% of that mobile traffic is through a mobile app, not a web browser on a mobile device. So it's very important that with Palace that we are bringing libraries and these collections into the place where people today are experiencing their digital lives on mobile devices and through a mobile app, a very targeted mobile app for that experience. And for academic users, this is very important because the majority, their key constituents, their students, their staff, and their faculty are living on these devices. And unfortunately, there wasn't any real e-reading system out there that was really designed on mobile for this academic use case and their user base. So that's kind of setting up the reason why we feel this is a good fit as part of this global infrastructure along with the OPDS. Next slide, please. So the open publication distribution really has two forms. There's the initial form that was based on Atom, and it was OPDS 1.0, and it was XML, very similar to OAI PMH. It's a catalog syndication format. But OPDS 2 is really based on JSON. And so it has a repetitive graph in it around the publication metadata, the links to that metadata. And that's really the power of it. It's a very open ecosystem. It's a very well thought out and loose model for what you would need to distribute content really in an open and understood manner. It has several layers to it, and at its root layer is the Readium Web Publication Manifest. This is very similar to the W3's web archive format. But what it basically is, it's a JSON file that defines what are the resources that make up a publication. That could be chapters, that could just be the file that contains, like in an EPUB, the HTML that contains the text of the document. It could be the images. So it's just a spec that defines what constitutes a publication. It has descriptive metadata, ways to navigate it, the order in which the materials and the resources that define that publication come together. When you abstract that out one more layer and you take groups of publications, you now have what we call a catalog. And that is really where OPDS really shines, because it is a collection of publications. So it has all the metadata, but it also has, as Nancy described, the links to that, that resource. That could even be a Readium Web Publication Manifest, but it could also just be an EPUB file or a PDF or an audiobook file. Or it could be linked to a license document to support any type of DRM transaction. And so where that portion of the spec has really evolved was actually thanks to libraries working with this community, and out came from that the ODL specification, Open Distribution Libraries. All it does is just adds more license information for content that may be licensed and have different type of restrictions about it around device limits or numbers of copies or concurrent use type of information. And it's really designed around libraries being able to operate in the kind of the confines of how it has to do this in the trade ebook world. And of course, we needed a different type of DRM that wasn't proprietary or governed by a proprietary institution. So the EDRL, which is a European organization, defines and supports the technology around licensed content protection, which is an open protocol around that can support DRM transactions, and it is built into the open ebooks, this OPDS ecosystem, Readium Web Publication Manifest system. So it all kind of works together, but very simple, all based on JSON. So very human readable, also very machine implementable and readable and performant. Next slide, please. So in Palace, we use OPDS extensively. We use OPDS and ODL to connect to different repositories in this open ecosystem. If you're OAPEN or ProQuest or other content providers, we use this protocol to be able to talk to your servers, to be able to talk to your repositories in order to understand what you have or what the library's holdings are, and then be able to aggregate that in a collection manager and represent that to the app with all the other type of tools it needs, such as authentication if that is required, or any type of DRM support if that is required. We use OPDS for our own content repositories where there may be content that we host and distribute, and we actually have custody of the file. We use OPDS to talk to Palace as well. So we kind of eat our own dog food in that sense. And then on the client side, the mobile app side, we use OPDS extensively, as well as the Redium Web Publication Manifest as that new container format for publications, as well as the licensed content protection where DRM is required. And so with this, by reinforcing this within our own, the Palace project, we've actually helped reinforce this global infrastructure built around OPDS and the Redium group of technologies, so that we can have an open, interoperable global infrastructure for ebook distribution, reading, and access. Next slide, please. That's it. So if there are any questions, we'll be around after this video and ready to take your questions about how we did this and how, I guess, easy or difficult or any other questions people may have on how they can join this open ecosystem. Thank you.